Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Strange and Exiles podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Toirac, and this is my co-host, Daniel Toirac Sr.
Hello, everyone. We're continuing on with our favorite subject thus far, Islam.
I know you've been enjoying it.
Well, I haven't enjoyed the reading.
Yeah,
I haven't enjoyed the reading, but I've been enjoying talking about it. Yeah, I mean, I even brought studies at church on Wednesday night, and I'm going to continue with that. The pastor told me, hey, get a couple weeks. And I'm like, I think I need 8 because there's no way that I can get through all of this in a couple weeks. But yeah, that's what's going on. We've been talking about Islam. This is our 4th episode, right, on Islam?
Yeah. I mean, the actual reading part of it is very sad to read with the history of Islam.
Oh, yeah. Just so you know, today is going to be a history class. Yeah. This is not going to be a lot of exchange between us. This is going to be straight. This is their history. And just so you know, this is a history that they are really trying to not let people know of. Yeah. They don't want people to know what we're going to talk about now tonight. So this is key. Number one, they want to present to you an Islam that is tolerant, that is open for all, that is nice, that is kind, that is peaceful. When we see the reality, the truth behind Islam, when we see the truth behind the doctrine of abrogation, which abrogates all of the peaceful verses and institutes the fighting verses, the violent verses, when we put all that together, we should not be surprised to see people blowing up buildings. We should not be surprised to see mass murderings at events, by Muslims, because they're actually doing what the Quran tells them to do. So, but today we're going to talk about the history.
And I guess just as opening thoughts on my side of it, obviously, I've never heard of all this stuff. I think most people in the Western world have never heard most of this stuff. Like, they hear maybe the Ottoman Empire taking over Constantinople back in the day, and that's like one of the big things. But to hear, not only is it just the violent part, but the fact that, as you might get into it, that the Muslims took a lot of research that other cultures, other countries took, and pawned it off as their own, and then now everyone kind of accepts that they invented some of these things. Even just things like that is just incredible to read about. So
yeah, we're going to talk about all of that. So
yeah. All right. So if you want to get started.
All right, so the history. I'm not going to say in a nutshell because it's very long. So we got a lot to talk about, a lot to get through today. I'm just going to be straight talking, maybe do quick explanations, but we're going to talk. The history of Islam is a history of struggle, brutal struggle, power. It isn't about evangelizing. It isn't about going out to the world to preach a gospel like Jesus left us. It is all about conquering. The entire religion is built upon either putting a sword to someone's throat and saying, convert to Islam, do the Shahada, or you're going to pay me a heavy, heavy tax, which you'll eventually not be able to pay, or get out of here in some cases, or you're dead. So think about the implications that this is. All of the Jews, all of the Christians, all of the pagans for that matter, all of them are being forced into something. Jesus Christ never forced anybody. He was very clear with his message. He even put down his own people. He was very clear directly to the Jews. He was very clear. You guys are hypocrites. You guys are in whitewashed tombs, but it's filled with dead men's bones. Christ never obligated, never made anybody. However, Islam and our boy Muhammad, what did he do? He was trying to deliver this peaceful message in Mecca. But what happens? When he sees that nobody cares about his religion, the Jews all say that he's blasphemous. The Christians are like, no, we love Christ. And then the pagans are like, no, we like our 360 gods. Leave us alone. He then gets kicked out. And then once he gets to Medina, that's when he says, you know what? Like I said last podcast, this peaceful, loving message is not working for us. So now if we're going to gain this, if we're going to make this into a real religion, doctrine aside, because what did Jesus Christ say? Jesus Christ, very clear, and one of the Ligonier conferences that we went to, this was the theme, the thematic theme of the thing. I will build my church. Jesus Christ, sovereign over all, presents the gospel, and Jesus Christ is in control of his church. Allah, this madman God, he puts this other madman in charge of his church, and this other madman decides, I'm not going to let Allah build the church. I'm going to build it with a 3-foot sword. That's how I'm going to build Allah's church. So you have Muhammad. Muhammad dies in the year 632. There were a couple of people that were in line to take over. Most of the Muslims were okay with Abu Bakr, which was his father-in-law, Muhammad's father-in-law, with the beautiful young Aisha. This is Aisha's dad. The beautiful little 6-year-old that got mounted when she was 9. Her father was a very close confidant with Muhammad. Obviously, Muhammad is sharing in his daughter's situation. So some of them wanted him, most of them wanted him, but then there were others that wanted this other guy named Ali ibn Abi Talib. He was the husband of Fatima, which was the daughter, his favorite daughter from his first wife, Khadijah. Remember, Khadijah was the older widow, and then Muhammad married her, and then they had the children. The boys died, and the girl survived. His favorite daughter from Khadijah was Fatima, and this guy Ali ibn Abi Talib was the husband of her. So there was a group of people that wanted him. The thing was that Abu Bakr ends up taking the position. Now there's suddenly a shift here. There's some people that are like, we don't want Abu Bakr. We wanted this Ali ibn guy. This was the beginnings of what we know as the Muslim split between the Sunnis and the Shia. The Sunnis, they look at Abu Bakr as the guy, whereas the Shia, they look at Ali ibn as their guy. Obviously, there's some other things that will happen that caused the rift, but so after his death, Abu Bakr, Muhammad's father-in-law, became the first caliph. And then after he dies, Umar ibn al-Khattab, another one of Muhammad's father-in-law. So in other words, Muhammad's just mounting all of these guys as daughters. And, so he became the second caliph in 634. So Abu Bakr only lasted 2 years. He was assassinated in 644 by his fellow Muslims. So he lasted 10 years before one of his own brethren killed him, which is cool. I mean, at least in terms of what I've read about these people, that's actually a pretty long term, to be able to go 10 whole years without being killed by a fellow brethren, a fellow believer. Then we have the famous Uthman ibn Affan, one of Muhammad's son-in-laws, was the third caliph. Uthman was married to 2 of Muhammad's daughters at separate times. He was assassinated in 656 by guess who? Muslims. So this guy actually lasted 12 years, which was pretty good. And this is the same Uthman, the famous Uthman, that he gathered all of the Qurans that were in all of Arabia. And then he basically said, okay, we're going to go with this one copy from Zaid, who was the scribe of Muhammad. And then he burned all the other ones. There were some Qurans that had more chapters, some that had less chapters. He decided, you know what? We're going to burn them all, which is funny because the Quran says that you can't burn the Quran. So he literally broke the rules of the Quran by burning all of the Qurans. But hey, that's just me. Then you have Ali ibn Abi Talib. He was the husband of Fatima, the first wife of Muhammad, Khadijah. Ali was opposed by Muhammad's third wife, Aisha, who held deep resentment towards him because he had believed that she was unfaithful to Muhammad at age 13, a more proper age to have relations, I guess, according to Jewish custom, and had advised Muhammad to divorce her. So in other words, this guy Ali, he suspected that Aisha was loose, was getting down, and he basically told Muhammad, look, I think that you should divorce her because she's probably being unfaithful to you. Later on, once Aisha's 45 years old, she led an army of thousands against Ali's army in the Battle of the Camel. Now, you might ask, why is it called the Battle of the Camel?
Why is it called the Battle of the Camel?
Good question. It was called the Battle of the Camel because Aisha came in riding a very rare, large camel named Al-Askar that had cost 200 gold coins. So, Aisha was defeated in this, but they spared her life. They did not kill her. And the battle ended when the camel was killed. I guess that just signifies the end of the war. Yeah. Like, okay, let's chop off the camel's head, war over. And this was the initial fracture of Islam into Shiite and Sunni. The Shiites follow Ali, the Sunnis follow Abu Bakr. So that after Ali dies, he was assassinated by guess who? His fellow Muslims in the year 661. Now you had a new caliphate that came into play, and it was called the Umayyad Caliphate. The Umayyad were a prominent family in Mecca. So in other words, they had resources. They were well known. So this reign, which lasted roughly about 90 years, it was known as the Umayyad Caliphate. So they went ahead and now you had a new caliphate that established. At the same time, once this Umayyad Caliphate was done, Ali's son Husayn ibn Ali challenged the succession of who would be the next caliph, and then this challenging was marked the event that permanently separated the Shiites and the Sunnis. So at the end of this of this Umayyad Caliphate, the questioning of the succession is what ended the caliphate, and then it marked that whole Sunni and Shia separation. The next caliphate, which was the Abbasid Caliphate, this was a caliphate lasted about 500 years. So this was a really good caliphate. This caliphate is known as the Golden Age of Islam. This is the Islamic Golden Age. They set up their capital in Baghdad on the Tigris River. So right there, we know Baghdad is still around today. The Abbasid Caliphate extended from the border of India in the east to Syria and Egypt and northern Africa in the west. Big area.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about from the border of India all through there, you have all of that, Iran, Iraq, all of that. Then you have all the way Egypt and all of northern Africa. It's a very large chunk of land. The caliphs, basically the caliphs are the leaders. The caliphs are the leaders of a caliphate, which is a kingdom or, whatever. The caliphs lived sensual, immoral lives surrounded by harems of women, of wives and slave women. However, what they did, this caliphate, it was quite interesting. Now, remember, we're only 120 years out of Muhammad and out of the Quran and all of that. This caliphate was a little bit more liberal, you would say. We would call them liberal Muslims today. They did not take a literal interpretation of the Quran. They were a lot more peaceful. They were more embracing of other religions. They didn't they didn't kill a bunch of people because they didn't believe in XYZ. They even created a huge educational institution, which is interesting. It was called the House of Wisdom, by the way. Bait al-Hikmah. I actually saw a documentary about this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was actually really interesting, the documentary about this House of Wisdom. It was a major center of science, including astronomy, mathematics, medicine, chemistry, alchemy, physics, zoology, geography. The astronomical observatory was built in the year 828. So immediately after they take control, there's a lot of movement. They're opening up to learning and learning more than what they just knew in the desert. Mm-hmm. In medicine, some important discoveries were made, including the existence of pulmonary circulation, cranial and spinal cord nerves, and the difference between smallpox and measles. So now you have it's not just learning, it's not just culture. You're also science is starting to explode as well. They built a huge library in Baghdad, and important books were translated into Arabic from many languages, particularly Greek, Aramaic, Chinese, and Sanskrit. In time, though, scholars began to see almost all European science and learning as an Arab creation, or at least something that appeared only under the influence of the Arabs. This opinion took root in the 19th century, and this is what you were talking about before. And by the early years of the 20th century have become, in some quarters at least, part of received wisdom. So in other words, let me explain. Since there was this push for learning in this Abbasid Empire, everybody, all the scholars say, wow, these people were enlightened. Like these desert people were they were like really learned, and they all of the science and all of this discovery that they were able to do, and they attributed it to the Arabs. However, this is the refutation. This has always been nonsense. First of all, a golden age of Islam in Baghdad was not because of Islam, but in spite of Islam. Tolerant, educational-minded Muslim caliphs are not the rule in history, but the extreme exception, which we'll get to later on as we go through this history. And they were tolerant and educational-minded not by not being strict followers of the Quran. Further, most of the inventions that have been promoted as Muslim inventions were actually inventions of China, Persia, and India. In fact, the heyday of the House of Wisdom was the 10th century, the 900s, after which it declined as the caliphs endorsed a more literal interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith. It was only when Muslim leaders did not take the Quran so literally that they promoted education, and many of the non-literates have been murdered by strict Muslims as the reward for their tolerance. Second, Muslim science was inherited from the people they subjugated. What? The sophisticated culture so often attributed to Muslims was actually the culture of the conquered people, the Judeo-Christian Greek culture of Byzantium. The remarkable learning of heretical Christian groups such as the Coptics, such as the Nestorians, extensive knowledge from Zoroastrian, Persia, and the great mathematical achievements of the Hindus. Keep in mind the early and extensive Muslim conquest in India. So in other words, the Muslims like to say, oh, look at everything we offered to the world. It was actually because of the people that they had as dhimmis, as subjugated people, that they brought that into the empire, and then they just exploited it.
Yeah.
So it isn't that the Muslims in Arabia are so much smarter than everybody. They just, they conquered the smart people, and then thus made the smart people part of their kingdom. Then they took advantage by saying, this is ours. Okay, cute. What may have misled many historians is that most contributors to Arabic science were given Arabic names, and their works were published in Arabic, that being the official language of the land. Consider mathematics, the so-called Arabic numerals. And you were telling me about this, right? What did you tell me earlier?
No, I mean, I learned in school briefly. One of my history professors kind of said that a lot of our modern algebra originates from the Arabs and in the Middle East, which apparently isn't true according to this book.
Yeah, that guy he didn't do his research on that.
Well, I guess a lot of people do consider a lot of that stuff to come from the Arabs because of what they're saying here.
Because of what this is.
Exactly.
Yeah, but of course. The so-called now let's consider mathematics, the official language, right? The Arabs came up with math. The so-called Arabic numerals were entirely of Hindu origin. Muslim or Arab medicine was in fact Nestorian Christian medicine. Even the leading Muslim and Arab physicians were trained at the enormous Nestorian Medical Center at Nisbus in Syria. So once again, they took advantage of the smart, learned people. They gave them Arabic names. They made them learn Arabic. They wrote down everything in Arabic. So every scholar afterwards would say, well, they had Arabic names, and they, and they wrote in Arabic. But we know that the truth is historically, for instance, the math part, they came from the Hindus, and the science stuff came from the Nestorian Christians. So as we go on, now you have Baghdad, that same Abbasid Empire, was the end of it. It was conquered by the Mongols under Hulagu Khan. Hulagu Khan, just so you know, is the grandson of I never know how to say his name.
I'm pretty sure.
Is it Genghis?
Genghis? But most Americans would say Genghis, but I think it's Genghis.
I always used to say Genghis, but then I saw Marco Polo on Netflix, and then they pronounce it differently.
I think it's Genghis.
Genghis?
Something like that.
Genghis Khan. The Mongol army was estimated at 150,000. They massacred hundreds of thousands and looted and destroyed the city, including the House of Wisdom and its libraries. And the documentary I saw, that they were trying to figure out where it was at, like doing archaeological digs to see if they could find this House of Wisdom. Hulagu's wife, Doku's Khatun, was a Nestorian Christian, and it is said that she arranged for the Christians living in Baghdad to be spared from the slaughter. Amen for that lady. So that was the end of the Abbasid Empire. Now the next dynasty to come into play was the Ayyubid dynasty. It was a short-lived dynasty. It ended in about 75 years. The short-lived Ayyubid dynasty was founded by Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, popularly known as Saladin. And I've seen shows and I've read documentaries. I've seen documentaries about this guy. Saladin's rule was centered in Egypt. So in other words, you had the other empire, their center was Baghdad and Iraq. This guy was over there in Egypt. But at its height, it spread all the way to Syria. So in other words, Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula, Jerusalem, and then Syria. Syria is north of Israel. Saladin is famous for leading the opposition to the European Crusaders. So now, once again, what are the Crusades? The Crusades were the Roman, the church, basically. I'm not going to say Roman Catholic Church, but yeah, let's just say the church at Rome. For hundreds of years, the Muslims had gone into their areas, and as I've said, and we're going to get through more of that tonight, they had killed all the Jews and all the Christians. They had raped the women, and they had taken all of the children as slaves. They had been doing that ever since the time of Muhammad. So guess what? It gets to a point that, and the Crusades were 400, nearly 500 years after Muhammad. So you're talking about a good chunk of time. All the Crusades was they wanted to take back the land, primarily Jerusalem. It wasn't retribution. It wasn't like, okay, you killed all of these people, Muhammad, and all of your followers and all of these caliphates. And no, it was, we want our land back. We want Jerusalem back. So that was really the leader. But the Saladin, he's famous in Muslim history because he opposed the Crusades. And he was there fighting, against them. So now let's talk a little bit about the wars against the Persians and the Byzantines. When Muhammad died, the territory to the north and west of Arabia was ruled by two empires. The Sasanians, I always used to say Sassanins, but Sasanians?
I think it's Sasanian, yeah, something like that.
Sasanians, yeah, Sasanians. The Sasanians controlled the region of Mesopotamia, Iran, and farther east. This is called the Neo-Persian Empire. So we have the Persian Empire we know from the Old Testament, that once King Cyrus and them, they allowed the Jews to come back. They defeated Babylon. They allowed the Jews to come back. They even helped them to rebuild the temple and all of that. But that empire was done so in the year 330 by the Greek Empire, by Alexander the Great. So, but it doesn't mean that the Persians just stopped existing. Later on, hundreds of years later, they would now form another empire in the form of the Sasanians. And then the Byzantines, which was the other empire, they controlled Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Anatolia, and Armenia. So they basically controlled a whole other section there. In November 636, the Muslims defeated Yazdegerd III, Emperor of Persia. Now, this isn't the time of Muhammad, just so we know. This is right after Muhammad died. In 636, the same year, Syria was conquered. The Byzantine Emperor Heraclius fielded a massive army of 100,000 or more against the Muslims' smaller army. But the Byzantines were defeated at the 6-day battle of Yarmouk. So now we have the Muslims going up against these empires, the Sasanians and the Byzantines. In 637, Jerusalem surrendered to the Muslims. In 641, now mind you, 637, that's 5 years after Muhammad died. In 641, the Muslims conquered Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. The entire population of Uqaita was wiped out. How do you think they were wiped out?
What, just like war?
Off with their heads.
Yeah, behead.
In 642, 10 years after Muhammad is dead, Muslims captured Egypt from the Byzantines. The towns of Benessa, Fayum, Nikhil, and Aboit were put to the sword. Entire towns were slaughtered by these Muslims 10 years. So in other words, now the Muslims have moved on from Arabia and they're moving west. They're now 10 years after Muhammad. They've already taken Jerusalem. They've taken northern parts of, which is Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. That's to the north. That's, I believe, north of Turkey, if I'm not mistaken. So in other words, they're traveling.
Yeah,
I mean, they're putting far. They're going far. And then now, 10 years after Muhammad, they've now taken Egypt from the Byzantines. What else did they do? A year later, in 643, Tripoli was pillaged, and Jews and Christians were forced to hand over their women and children as slaves to an Arab army. Can you imagine if you're living in Tripoli and then suddenly out of nowhere this army rolls up and they're like, "Give me all your women and children"? It's all about women with these people.
Yeah.
In 649, Muslims captured Cyprus, which is a small island, and then established their rule by a great massacre. Lovely. In 698, now fast forward, the Muslims conquered Carthage and drove the Byzantines out of Africa. So now they have officially taken over that entire northern Africa, which is all Muslim countries today. Carthage was razed to the ground and most of its inhabitants killed. Amir forced the Jews and Christians to hand over their women and children as slaves to the Arab army. They were told that they could deduct, get this is interesting. They were told that they could deduct the value of their enslaved family from the jizya, the poll tax. Okay, so a Muslim army comes in, tells me I got to give you and Tanya up. And then I get to deduct the value of you two from the tax that I got to pay these people. But then who determines your value? That's the question I have.
Yeah.
Like, in other words, is depending on the age of the woman, is she more valuable, childbearing years? Or is it, if it's like your great grandmother, like, is she not worth it? Like, I don't know. I'm just wondering, like how do they value the women and the children? Between 698 and 709, the Muslims defeated the nomadic Berber tribes of northwestern Africa. So now this is going towards Morocco, northwest. Muslim leader Musa bin Nasir completed the conquest. Get this. 300,000 were taken captive. 60,000 were sold as slaves. 30,000 were forced into the Muslim army to be used in the invasion of Spain.
Wow.
So you want to know how Muslim got to 2 billion people? It wasn't because they were knocking on doors on Saturday mornings. It wasn't because they were standing outside of the Dollar Tree with a little cart that says jw.org or, islam.org. They literally took it. They took people. And then the ones that they didn't care for, they just sold them as slaves. And the ones that were really good, they were like, all right, you're actually going to help us go and kill more people. Okay, lovely. Lovely religion. Lovely religion. Now let's talk about Islam in Western Europe, since I mentioned Spain. So remember, like I said last time, that the Muslim religion is a religion about conquering. It is all about conquering. It's really, the faith itself is kind of dumb, because if you look at the pillars of Islam, they're kind of just dumb. You just have to say a shahada and you got to repeat it every day, and then you got to, they put a gun to your head that you got to give almsgiving, which is the redundant. There's really no true theology. There's no doctrine, It's basically do these things, do the 5 prayers a day, do your shahada, and you may or may not go to heaven. That's still suspect. We still don't have assurance of salvation. Okay. But it is a religion that it is also political. See, because Christianity is not political, even though modern day, they're really doing a horrible job at blending belief with politics, and that's a personal issue that I have with the modern day, at least American society. Or it's not even American; it's all throughout the world, really, where you blend religion with politics. I am of the thought that those two should always remain separate. You should never bring religion. You should never bring politics into the pulpit. And, it's just, and Christians really should not be involved in politics. That's my personal view. Christians should not be involved in politics. They should be Christians or be a politician, but don't be both, because one of them is going to lead you astray. Mm-hmm. Your Christianity is either going to lead you to profess that you're a crooked politician, or the crookedness in your political thing will lead you away from Christ. So anyway, but that's just my thoughts. So between 711 and 725, so now we're looking at roughly 90 years after Muhammad died, Muslims conquered Hispania, which is Spain and Portugal. So in other words, the Muslims, and just so you know, the Muslims were in Spain and Portugal for the next 700 years. It isn't that, they just conquered it and then suddenly some Spanish guy with chorizos al vino, with chorizo and wine, suddenly he came in with his little knife and then he started stabbing the Muslims. They all left. No, they were there for 700 years, the Muslims. The Muslims established an Islamic kingdom known as Andalusia. It was also called the Caliphate of Cordoba, Muslim Spain, and Islamic Iberia. Those are all cities that are in Spain, if you don't know your geography. Al-Andalus lasted until 1492, when it was conquered by Queen Isabella I of Castile. And that is the same Queen Isabella who sent over who to discover America?
Columbus, Christopher Columbus.
Thought you were going to say Marco Polo for a second. Christopher Columbus, the same year. So in the same year that Christopher Columbus finds America, the Muslims are officially eradicated from Spain and from Portugal. The Jews of the realm, now this is the Jews in that Hispania, which is Spain and Portugal. The Christians and the Jews of the realm were put under heavy dhimmi status. They were forced to pay a heavy jizya tax and had no real civil rights. This was because under the provisions of Sharia law, the rights of Jews and Christians were subordinate to those of the Muslims. The legal testimony of a Muslim always trumped that of a Christian or a Jew, no matter how many Christians or Jews testified. So in other words, you got 30 Jews and Christians testifying. You got one Muslim, they go in favor of the Muslim. Mm-hmm. Okay. Even though they're heavily taxing them with the jizya. In 850 to 851, many Christians in Cordoba were put to death for insulting Muhammad. It's just so sad to see these murders occurring, Between 732 and 801, see, now we're getting the opposition now. Yeah. See, now we got, we got to get rid of these Muslims because they're already in Portugal and in Spain. So what's the next country to hit up? France. So France is like, we don't want these dudes rolling up in here. So between 732 and 801, Charles Martel, just so you know, Martel, it stands for martillo. So they call him Charles the Hammer. Literally. That's cool. Charles Martel and his descendants stopped the Muslim advance in Western Europe. In the year 724, Odo, he was a ruler of the Frankish kingdom, because back then, remember, it wasn't like France. The country that we know of France today, they had separate kingdoms. Yeah. And these separate kingdoms, then they would unite against obviously common enemies. Odo was the ruler of the Frankish kingdom of Aquitaine, defeated the Muslims at the Battle of Toulouse, temporarily halting their advance into France. Charles Martel joined forces with Odo, and with 30,000 men, they defeated an invading army of 80,000 or more Muslims at the Battle of Tours. This was a major, major turning point in history. It halted the advance of Islam into Western Europe for the time. In the year 759, Pepin III, or Pepin the Short. I like the Pepin the Short one because we actually talked about him in church history, but the church history class that we did at church. He was the son of Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer. He captured Narbonne and drove the Muslims out of France. In 801, Carolus Magnus, Charlemagne, Carlomagno, he was the son of Pepin the Short and grandson of Charles the Hammer Martel, captured Barcelona and established a buffer zone against further Muslim encroachment. So now we're like now they're fighting back and they're making gains. So then now they take over Barcelona. The reconquest of Spain happened over a period of 400 years. In the year 1085, Alfonso VI of Leon captured Toledo. That's another city over there in Spain. This was 11 years before the first crusade to the Holy Land. In 1236, Cordoba fell to King Ferdinand III of Castile. In 1249, Portugal was reconquered by Alfonso III, who became the first head of a Catholic kingdom. And then in 1492, Granada, the last remaining Muslim state in Spain, surrendered to Queen Isabella I of Castile. So from the previous history, we could see that the Catholic Crusades to the Holy Land, which began in 1096, were a response to 450 years of war and aggression, forced conversion and enslavement of Christians by Muslims. Today, it is popular to believe that the Crusaders were the instigators of war and aggression. That's what the Muslims like to tell you. But this is not true. Though we don't justify what happened in the Crusades, as they were misguided ventures from top to bottom, the Crusaders were not the foremost aggressors in the matter. They were just trying to get back what had been stolen from them by the Muslims. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's good for people to understand that even though as Christians we don't justify violence as this says here, we need to know that the Crusades aren't just some weird attempt to like, oh, this religion is popping up in the Middle East, we have to go kill them. There's something that was behind it, a reason, a decent reason too.
A very good reason, yeah. When you go and you kill a bunch of people, imagine that. So now let's talk about Islam in India. You know, that's something that, who knows about the Islamic India history? Well, you're going to find out right now. Between the year 712 and 1193, so a period of almost 500 years, right? Muslim armies raided India from the west in subsequent waves of attacks. They demolished temples, robbed, murdered, raped, and enslaved the people. In 712, Muhammad Qasim raided India on order of the governor of Iraq. So in other words, the governor of Iraq, because remember, Iraq was really the base of after they got out of Arabia. They demolished temples, shattered sculptures, plundered palaces, killed vast numbers of men. It took 3 days to slaughter the inhabitants of the port city of Dibal. They carried off their women and their children to slavery. Between 997 and 1030, Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni crossed the Thar Desert and plundered Hindu and Buddhist kingdoms in Pakistan and northern India 17 times in those 33 years. And he extended Islamic rule into western Punjab. He passed through India like a whirlwind, destroying, pillaging, and massacring. In the year 1001, he defeated the Hindu king Jayapala, killed 15,000, and took, guess this, he took 500,000 as slaves, including thousands upon thousands of children. In 1025, Ghazni destroyed the Shiva temple at Somnath. The temple was served by 1,000 Brahmin priests and 600 musicians. Mahmud's Muslim army killed, get this, the 50,000 Hindu defenders and completely destroyed the complex. Just mass murder after mass murder after mass murder just to occupy and to conquer and to take over lands. The Delhi Sultanate, so this is now the leaders after. The Delhi Sultanate in India lasted from 1206 to 1526. During this, Delhi is a city. Delhi, like, you know, yeah. During this time, many Hindu kingdoms were overthrown and placed under Muslim rule. By the year 1330, the Delhi Sultanate controlled nearly all of India. The Delhi Sultanate was violent, unstable throughout its whole history. Many of the sultans were murdered by their own relatives, friends, and soldiers. A huge amount of wealth was confiscated, including the Koh-i-Noor, the Mountain of Light, one of the world's largest known diamonds. Its uncut weight was 793 carats.
Wow.
793 carats. I mean, women, you know, most women would be happy with a 1, maybe a 2 carat diamond. Imagine a 793 carat diamond. However, its cut weight today is 105.6 carats. And do you know where that diamond's at?
Taj Mahal? Or no? I'm not sure. I don't know.
We actually saw this diamond without knowing it.
Oh, really?
We literally saw it and we didn't know that we were looking at that. And I wish I would have known about this. In the year 2016, we traveled to England and we walked into the Tower of London where the royal, the jewels are. Mm-hmm. And we literally saw it. Really? Queen Elizabeth's mother, it's on her crown.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, huge. I wish I would have known this back then, but I would have been like, oh, look, that was at one point the world's biggest diamond. So Muslim historians mention the destruction of hundreds of other temples, the burning and razing of large numbers of entire villages and towns, the slaughter and enslavement of multitudes of non-Muslims by this Delhi Sultanate. Many of the Delhi Sultanate rulers were harsh and cruel. Under Ala al-Din Khilji, agriculture taxes were 50%. Now, if you're an agriculturist, you're already not making much money. 50%, which is what Muhammad required of the Jews of his day. Anyone suspected of being a threat to his power was killed along with the women and children of that family. Another ruler, the Mongol ruler Timur, ravished parts of India. His fearsome armies put to death an estimated 17 million people, amounting to about 5% of the world's population at that time. He swept over vast stretches of country, killing and burning for the mere love of destruction. In India, Timur executed 100,000 captives and destroyed many cities, including Delhi, which he left in ruins. And this is a religion of tolerance, right? Yeah, of peace. Okay. The battle, I need to keep reminding you of that as we talk about this. Because remember, what do they say today? Tolerance, peace, peace. Peace and love, peace and love. The battle for Delhi took place in December 1398. Get this. With Timur opposed by the army of Mahmud ibn Tuluk, head of the Delhi Sultanate. It was Muslim against Muslim. Oh, man. Another group, the Islamic Mughal or Mughal Empire, controlled what is now Afghanistan, Pakistan, and much of India from 1526 to 1827. So now we're getting more into our age, right? In the 1600s, the Mughal Empire was one of the largest and wealthiest in the world. Its population was 150 million people. Mughal painting and architecture reached its zenith at that time, the Taj Mahal being the preeminent example. The Mughal Empire began in 1526 when Mongol leader Babar, he was a leader from 1526 to 1531. He defeated Ibrahim Lodi, the final ruler of the Delhi Sultanate that had begun in 1206. So in other words, this Babar, he defeats Ibrahim Lodi, who was the last ruler, thus ending that sultanate. Thank the Lord, because they were horrible. Jalal-ud-Din Akbar the Great was the third ruler of the Mughal dynasty and the one who expanded it across the Indian subcontinent from Kabul in the northwest to Bengali in the east, and as far south as the Godavari River. The empire tripled not only in size, but also in wealth. Now, once again, remember, this is a Muslim empire, all right? We need to keep track of this. Its revenue in the year 1600 was 17.5 million pounds, much more than that of Great Britain. So in other words, this empire is even bigger than, wealthier than Great Britain. Mm-hmm. He had 13 wives and a harem of 300. He was busy. At the Battle of Talikota in the year 1565, 100,000 Hindus were killed. The city of you pronounce that.
Vijayanagara?
Perfect. Was burned, and the pillage and looting continued for 6 months. After defeating the Rajput in Chittor in 1568, Akbar ordered, get this, the massacre of 30,000 captured Hindus. How comes I never heard the Hindus talk like about, oh, you guys killed all of us? Like, right? I mean, I guess if I was Hindu, then I would know about this. Like, it's something that's never come across. Like, I didn't know that the Muslims killed all these Hindus. I just assumed they were killing Christians and Jews. But no, they were just killing everybody. Yeah. Akbar's eldest son, Jahangir, took the throne and consolidated the territorial gains and strengthened the empire. At Jahangir's death in 1627, the Mughal Empire was one of the greatest empires in the world. Jahangir was succeeded by his son, Shah Jahan. Now, this Shah Jahan guy is the real deal, just so you know. He is known as the greatest builder of the Mughal Empire. Some of the best architects and craftsmen in the world resided in his empire. The preeminent example of this is the Taj Mahal. Isn't the Taj Mahal beautiful?
Yeah.
Like, it's a beautiful building, which he built as a tomb for his second and favorite wife, Mumtaz Mahal. So that huge building was built as a tomb for her. In other words, look how much money the dude had to blow. This wife died in the year 1631 while giving birth to their 14th child. Well, of course. I mean, what is this, a factory? I mean, how long do you expect her to live? 14 children? Mumtaz Mahal means elect of the palace. Her real name was Arjumand Banu. No. The cost of the construction of the Taj Mahal was 32 million Indian rupees, which in 2015 money would be about 52 billion Indian rupees, or roughly 825 million US dollars.
Just for a tomb.
For a tomb. Beautiful tomb, though. Yeah. But it is one of the wonders of the world. But just to think about, just like put this in perspective, how much money did this guy have that he's able to blow 825 million at that time on a tomb for his wife that died after giving birth to 14 children? I mean, what else are you going to ask of her? To be honest with you, he should have built it twice the size. Shah Jahan's famous peacock throne, if you actually Google it, you can see images of it. Not real images, because there was no cameras back then, but drawings. Shah Jahan's famous peacock throne took 7 years to construct and cost, get this, twice as much as the Taj Mahal. So this throne was $1.5 billion for a throne. How much money do you have to throw away to spend $1.5 billion on a throne? The throne's name comes from its images of peacocks. I guess he really liked peacocks. The throne was made of solid gold, adorned with pearls and precious stones, including the world's largest diamond, the Koh-i-Noor, that is now, and the British royals, their jewels, the crown jewels, and the 361-carat Timur ruby, which later on they discovered that it wasn't a real ruby.
Oh, wow.
But at the time, that's why it probably cost him so much, because he had to buy these gems. He got ripped off. And then towards the end of that, in the 18th century, the Mughals became puppets to the British. And in the 19th century, their empire was replaced with the British Raj. The British Raj. And now to end this lovely time, how long have we been running?
50 minutes.
Okay. To end this lovely world history, this history of the Muslims, we're going to end it with probably the worst of all, besides Muhammad and those first original people. Those first 100 years or so, 150 years. Now we got the worst of all. Of all of the empires that we've talked about, now we got the worst one. Guess which one it is, Junior?
Well, I can read it here. The Ottoman Empire.
Let them know what it is.
The Ottoman Empire.
Okay, go ahead. Read the first line.
The Ottoman Empire lasted from 1299 to 1918.
Really?
And the founder was Osman Ghazi, also known as Othman or Ottoman. The empire got its name from him.
So that's how they got the name Ottoman Empire. The founder was Osman Ghazi, but he was known as Ottoman or Ottoman. Perfect. In the century after Osman, his descendants conquered all of Anatolia and the Balkans. In 1453, Osman's descendant Mehmed II conquered Constantinople, ending the Byzantine Empire. So this finally, the Byzantine Empire is ended with the taking of Constantinople. Just so you guys know, if you don't know, Constantinople is Istanbul today. Like Istanbul, Turkey. The 21-year-old sultan, a young man, wanted to be the fulfillment of a prophecy by Muhammad that said, one day, Constantinople will be conquered. How wonderful and blessed are the commander of its conquest and his soldiers. So his grand aspiration in life was to be the fulfillment of that prophecy. The 7-week siege began on April 6, 1453. The Muslims had a massive cannon built by Orban, a Christian from Hungary. He originally offered his services to the Byzantines, the Christians, but they couldn't afford his salary and didn't have the resources necessary to build the cannons. So this Christian turncoat, he then offered his services to Mehmed, the Muslims, boasting that he could build a cannon that would smash the very walls of Babylon, which he ended up doing. He ended up building this massive cannon that had to be carried by 200 to 400 men, and it was just crazy. And this cannon, along with other cannons that they built, they were able to go ahead and start bombing, sending cannon fire over to Istanbul, which back then it was Constantinople, and they ended up taking over and defeating them. And after they defeated, in the afternoon of May 29th, the Ottoman ruler Mehmed entered the city. It is said that when he saw the destruction, he wept and said, "What a city we have given over to plunder and destruction." As a sign of triumph of Islam over Christianity, he entered the Hagia Sophia, the church that was then turned into a mosque with the addition of minarets for the proclamation of Muslim prayers. Today, the Hagia Sophia is a museum. It is no longer a mosque.
What was that short series we watched on, I think it was Netflix? Was it called Ottoman?
Yeah, the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah,
Ottoman Empire. Yeah, watch that. It's really good. By the way, hit the like button. I should have said that. Hit the subscribe button. Hit all of that stuff because we need people to watch this stuff. The zenith now. The zenith of the Ottoman Empire was the reign of Suleiman I. One of his wives, Roxolana, had been a Greek Orthodox Christian, but was converted to Islam when she became a slave in his harem. So in other words, remember we always said that whenever they defeat people, they take the women as slaves?
Yeah.
So this woman, Roxolana, had been a slave, a sex slave of him, and then he took her on as a wife, I guess, and then she converted to Islam. In 1544, Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire and Ferdinand of Austria signed a 5-year treaty with Suleiman. The Muslim Sultan refused to call Charles Emperor of the Romans because he claimed that title for himself. Between 1532 and 1554, Suleiman fought his fellow Muslims of the Shiite dynasty of Persia. So now we get infighting. He captured Baghdad and Lower Mesopotamia for the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans continued to attack Eastern Europe until the Battle of Vienna in 1683. The Ottoman rulers were murderous even towards their own families. For example, 2 of Suleiman's sons, Mustafa and Bayezid, and 4 of his grandsons, Bayezid's sons, were murdered with his support. In 1595, when Muhammad Murad IV came to the throne, he had his 19 brothers murdered and 7 of his father's pregnant concubines sewn into sacks and thrown into the river.
It's just crazy.
But remember, these are Muslims, Allah's people, right? Or shouldn't they be godly at least a little bit? What about all this says God? Murad, the fourth's son, Ibrahim, just so you know, Ibrahim is Abraham in Arabic, threw his infant son into a cistern in a fit of rage and had his entire harem of 300 women put into sacks and thrown into the river. Guess he just got tired of them. The Ottomans were brutal throughout their history. The British statesman William Gladstone said of the Ottomans, "No government ever has so sinned. None has proved itself so incorrigible in sin, or which is the same so impotent in reformation." So even a British statesman said these guys are just horrible. In 1822, almost the entire Greek population of the island of Chios, tens of thousands of people were massacred or enslaved. In 1823, 8,750 were slaughtered at Missolonghi. In 1850, thousands of Assyrians were murdered in the province of Mosul. In 1860, 12,000 Christians were put to the sword in Lebanon. In 1876, 14,700 Bulgarians were slaughtered. At the town of Batal, 5,000 out of 7,000 inhabitants were murdered. In 1877, Armenians were slaughtered in Bayazid. In 1879, Armenians were slaughtered in Alashagurd. Between 1894 and 1896, hundreds of thousands of Armenians were slaughtered. In 1909, Armenians were slaughtered in Adana. In 1915 to 1916, an artificial famine induced by the Turks killed more than 100,000 Maronite Christians in Lebanon and Syria. Between 1915 and 1922, the Ottoman Empire massacred an estimated 1.5 million Armenians, and hundreds of thousands became homeless and stateless refugees. Women were raped and used as sex slaves. The property of the Armenians was confiscated by their Muslim neighbors. Of course, the Ottomans, or the Turks, you know, they have denied the massacre of Armenians, but many irrefutable eyewitness accounts were published. In 1922, the Armenian Christians of the city of Smyrna were slaughtered. The Greek Orthodox Metropolitan Chrysostomus was blinded, beaten, and hacked to pieces. He had been offered refuge by the French, but he refused, wanting to stay with his people. The Ottoman Empire officially ended at the conclusion of World War I, and in 1923, it was replaced with the current Republic of Turkey. However, it is still illegal to this day to talk about the Armenian genocide in Turkey today. Christian missionaries have no legal status in Turkey. In 2007, so this is recent now.
Yeah.
In 2007, 3 Christians, a German missionary, and 2 Turkish converts were murdered for operating a bookstore that sold Bibles. They were tied up and their throats were slashed. In 2010, Bishop Luigi Padovese, the head of Turkey's Catholic Church, was beheaded by his Muslim driver and bodyguard, who shouted, "I killed the great Satan, Allahu Akbar." Between 1936 and 2015, Turkey seized 7,500 properties from the Greek Orthodox Church. In the last 100 years, get this, the Christian population of Turkey has been reduced from 20% to 0.2%. That, my friends, is the true, real history of Islam. Yes, they're going to paint it many, many different ways. They're going to present themselves as nice, as loving, as accepting, as tolerant. This is the truth. This is the God honest truth. They are a religion that is solely 100% based on murder, on rape, on pillaging, on conquering. That is all they're about. And guess what? Next time, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how the Muslims, see, we have revisionist history here. Whenever we talk about slavery, who do they usually talk about?
America with the slave trade.
Yeah, it was the Spaniards and the Portuguese, and then later on the Americans with the slave trade, right? They focus a lot about that. How about if I give you a little nugget that there were more slaves traded by Muslims than by all combined of the Spaniards, Portuguese, and French and Americans. We'll talk about that next week. Next week will be the Muslims and the slave trade. Once again, history they don't want you to know about, boys and girls. This is stuff no Muslim wants to admit to, and definitely no Muslim wants you to know about. So we're going to get into it next week. Capiche?
Capiche.
Do you have any closing thoughts so I could drink some water?
I mean, obviously, it's incredibly sad and terrible that it's not only even, like you said, Christians and Jews, which you would expect it to be because the Quran is mostly admonishing the Christians and the Jews, but it's literally all over the world. I guess they haven't gone as far as Asia, like China and all that. It seems like, according to this, but just Indians, North Africans, I'm sure before they conquered all that land, they were following all their tribal gods or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's just incredible that all this slaughter has gone on, and at least nowadays, people aren't really taught about this. You don't know anything about it. You go to school and you learn about the Roman Empire and eventually, like, whatever, the French and the English Empire, and that's it.
Yeah, they focus on the big empires, but they don't focus on some of these. Well, obviously, they talk about the Ottoman Empire. Mm-hmm. Ottoman Empire is something that they teach. Yeah. But once again, they don't really get into details. You know, it's like they just say, oh, the Ottoman Empire conquered this and that. But, okay, but tell us how they conquered that. Like what? They just showed up and then everybody put their swords on the ground? No, they conquered it by killing, beheading, murdering, raping, taking as slaves children and women. That's how they conquered. Yeah. It's a very different conquering than, for instance, what America did against the British, where we conquered them on the battlefield. You know, we didn't, you know, the British weren't raping and pillaging us and then we conquered them. You know, it's a very different story when you, as a nation, you conquer another nation on the battlefield. It's a different story when you go in there and you subjugate, and then you take the women as sex slaves and you take the children as slaves, and then you behead all the men because they don't want to convert to your religion. That is when religion and politics unite. It is not a religion, it is a political religion. And they have united it. Muhammad really united it from the beginning. So it went away from teachings to now it went to conquering. And once you institute the religion as your main political drive, then you get this mass murder, and it's sad, and it's still going on today. And, you know, we'll keep talking about it because people need to know.
And one of the scariest things that I read, because I went a little bit farther than what we've talked about today, is how still in Europe, and even like the Christian quotes, like France and England, that there are no-go zones that are occupied by Muslims.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. That part was interesting.
It's interesting, but it's also, like, in my mind, incredibly scary.
It's happening now. That's why I'm saying the next episode is going to be even crazier. Just so you guys know. This one was we just kind of went through the history, kind of more of a historical class. Next episode, that's when the hairs are going to start going up. Yeah. Because when I read that, I was like, whoa.
And then what we're talking about with jihad, the weakened stage and the middle stage and jihad stage, that's when you're like, oh, it's actually like a real thing that they're practicing.
It's a thing that's going on today. Yeah. And that's what I told you, that their goal is to conquer the world. It isn't just, oh, yeah. And that's why that's why I said they're system. And see, you went ahead and read it. I was trying to walk you into that one. That is why they have systematically left the deserts and they have started to move into all of these countries. They're in America. They're in all of Europe, every country of Europe. They've already basically taken over a lot of Asia, the southern Asia.
Yeah.
But they're growing. They're growing in Australia. They're growing, and they systematically do that because of the whole jihad thing. And we'll get to that next week.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Well, thank you guys for joining us. I think this episode was both equally interesting and shocking to hear about history that you don't know about. So thank you for bringing it to us.
yeah, no problem. I'll do it again next week.
Yep. See you guys next week.
God bless you.